We'll go on to the next session of AHR duration, but before that, I'd like to do an announcement that after the AGM, that is in the evening, the certificates will be given to all the members who had applied for life membership and associate membership. So you can collect it that time after the AGM. So I would like to call upon Dr. Ramchandran sir, one of the senior most plastic surgeons in our country, to deliver the AHR's oration. It will be on a cosmetic surgeon's terrace with hair transplant. Ramchandran sir, please.
Anil is wanting to introduce me, so let him have the pleasure.
So, Dr. Ramchandran sir, we all know him. I'll say it's a great asset to the society of plastic surgeon as well to the hair restoration surgeon. He's one of the senior most plastic, cosmetic and hair transplant surgeon. He did his MCH in 1984, and after that he did extensive training in aesthetic surgery from USA, from Germany and from the France. Beyond his professional qualification and the qualities, he's a great musician, and we all know when he is on harmonica, जो बोलते हैं ना हाव का रुख बदल जाता है, दिल की धड़कनें रुक जाती है, and he really plays a very great harmonica, and not only a musician, he's a great animal lover. He does great job for especially for the street animals. He has formed a society, Scooby Society. There are many other things to learn from him. One thing is, I still remember his one statement when he was running in the morning in Mahabalipuram conference. I saw him running and came. I asked him, from where you are coming? He said, Anil, I have earned my breakfast. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, I did my today's exercise. Means organizing a conference, doing extensive work, and still he was doing the exercise in the morning. And the statement that he has earned his breakfast, I think we all should learn many things from this great plastic, cosmetic and hair transplant surgeon. So now, Dr. Ram sir.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Anil, for those very kind words. I'm indeed humbled. Sorry for the hiccup. Good afternoon, everybody. For the oration, I was thinking what exactly could I talk about, and I found that my journey has been very long. So I wanted to talk something which is light-hearted, but at the same time it was quite serious when I did it. I dedicate this lecture to Dr. Ari, who initiated me into aesthetic surgery and played a major role. So on completing my plastic surgery, I did take an untrodden path. The path was something which I had in mind, but I was not sure whether it will work. And that was to pursue aesthetic surgery way back in '84. But I had this habit of choosing something which was a little different. And as you can see over here, when I was a house surgeon, I picked up a bike which was about 15 years old, which was condemned, and then I said I wanted to make it into an easy rider. It took me about 4 months of sitting with a mechanic and then going every day, spending about 2 hours, and then I finally got this done in '77, and it was with me for about 8 years. So choosing the untrodden path was not something which was very different, but I thought it was a trait in me. So I did embark on a major training, and then I decided to go with Baker and Gordon, which are one of the top people in aesthetic surgery in Miami, and worked with Iluz, who's the father of lipo, and Mitz and Peroni of the facial aesthetics, and also spent some time with Beamer because my chief wanted me to do some micro. And these are some pictures taken at that time with a group of nurses in Miami. Of course, my wife was not aware of all this. And, but this, I just wanted to tell you, it was a very nomadic life. And it was a very frugal existence for that 1 year period, where it was more of a hand-to-mouth existence. I didn't have money to have a haircut. And that's the reason why it was growing. And in fact, when I came back, my daughter, who was 1 year old, probably was scared and petrified that she refused to come to me. So I came back and joined the Department of Aesthetic Surgery, which Dr. Ari had just started. This is probably the first unit of its kind in the country, dedicated exclusively to aesthetic surgery. But then things were not easy. I knew aesthetic surgical practice was going to be difficult. India was not made for it. But the agonizing part was people who started coming to me was for hair loss. And never in my wildest dreams had I ever thought of hair transplant during my entire training period. I've never even thought that it would be something which was important. But then common things are commoner. I mean, that's the basic principle. So I started to read about it. And my journey in hair transplant started in 1986. And that was the first surgery of hair transplant which I did at that time. And all these things which I did during this entire 35-year period has helped me to reach where I am today. I joined the era of punches, hair flaps, and scalp reduction. I did all of them. And this is the first machine which I had bought in 1986 from Osada and Paget, which I still have. It's a memoir for me. I still use it. And the punches were 4 to 5 millimeters in diameter. And just for our younger colleagues, this is a stat record which I kept manually, and it is still there with me, which tells me what sort of punches, what are the number of grafts, what are the diameter. So it's the importance of documentation that I wanted to bring over here. You can see here, I put 32 plugs. So imagine somebody who's doing 3,000, they should know that I started from 32, just for information. And this is my own punch graft. And this is a result of one patient who went through this surgery. I was ecstatic when I saw the hair grow. In 86, at the end of 8 months, when he came and showed me this hair growth, I mean, it was like seeing a plant bloom. And this was how it was done. It was done in 4 sessions. And there was a methodology in this madness. You had to do first session as described over here, first, second, and at the end of 4 sessions, the area was complete. And as you can see over here, the gaps were there, and then at the completion of 4 sessions, it was all complete. But then the area which it covered was much less, and all the grafts were through secondary intention was the way the donor area used to heal. I did scalp reduction. Some of you may not be even familiar with it, but just for you to know, the prerequisite was a lax scalp. And I will briefly show a video just for the uninitiated, what could be done under local. This is something which I used to do very, very frequently. And that way, we used to reduce the bald area to so much that more grafts were now available to do good justice to the front and the mid scalp. So it was a routinely done procedure. It used to be completely done under local, and it used to require very wide undermining, almost to the auricular region. And if you are having a fair amount of local, there is no need to worry about it. The ring block is good enough. And you undermine it very extensively, otherwise the closure will be tight. So this is just to illustrate that you could reduce it by about almost close to 3 centimeters every time. And then I used to repeat it at the end of about 6 months, go back and repeat the procedure. Thereby, we'll have a very good closure. As you can see over here, that this is the strip excised, the bald area, and this is under local. And you can see how the bald area and the crown, as well as the area, has been completely reduced. I also did flaps. My favorite was the Jury flap, which is the TPO. I also did Elliott's flap. I did free flap to reverse the rate of growth, and I can show you an example of one of these patients where this is a TPO flap which was reversed. I anastomosed it to the opposite side, anterior division of the superficial temporal. So I have done quite a few of them, both ipsilateral as well as free flaps. I did the Elliott's flap also. The advantage was the growth was, there was no lag phase, the growth started, and there was profuse growth. But in the meantime, the enthusiasm of seeing hair grow had died down. And the punch size had been reduced to 2 to 3 millimeters. And from the old paradigm of large grafts, it was now smaller grafts planted randomly. And as you can see over here, this was my punch, and these were mini grafts. And here they were not slits. They were again drilled with punches. The idea was every time you remove 2 millimeters, you're removing 2 millimeters of bald skin rather than making a slit. That was the concept. And you will not believe, I had never seen any of these procedures. It was all visualized by reading. As I told you, I have never seen anything. So when I documented it, I found that this result was a little better than that. That was mini graft and this was plug. And I had many of these patients. Sorry for these poor pictures. These are all transparencies. We lived in an era of slides. I don't know, many of you might not have even known. They're prone to fungus and so many things, but I unearthed them. And this is all with mini grafts. And I also used my cosmetic surgical training. I performed rhinoplasty. I was a little happy that something which I had learned I was able to do. Like in this patient, I did a rhinoplasty, and I also enhanced his look with a little bit of mini grafts, which you can see in this picture. His nasal width was reduced, and he had a rhinoplasty, of course, separately staged hair transplant. I used a tissue expander, which again was something which plastic surgeons are very fond of, especially in post-burn alopecia. And you can see that the density of the coverage is far better than what you can achieve with grafts, except for the patient's compliance during that 3-month period. So, but by the time the strip was already coming in, but I was still continuing to harvest with punches because, I was so happy. I was using punches for plugs, I was using punches for mini grafts, but then somebody said, now you have to do it as a strip. I was not happy with that. So what I did was, instead of putting the drill holes very far apart, I started harvesting very close to each other and then excised it. So I was still happy using the punch, and then I was still happy closing it instead of leaving it for secondary intention. So that's how I circumvented this. And suddenly there was a new change. They said nobody is using mini grafts. Bob Limmer came out and said that you have to use micrografts, and that is going to be the hallmark of surgery now. So, and he was a strong advocate of micrografts. I said, what is happening now? Just now I've standardized something into mini grafts and somebody comes with micro. And having been comfortable with mini grafts, to go into micrografts was again a thought block. So then I said, okay, the switch has to be made. So, but I didn't know how to get single hair graft. So what we did was, after we excised that ellipse around it, that trellis network which was there, we started generating single hair graft from that waste network. And also from the pie grafts which were there, we started dividing them to make micrografts. And then I found that this was the result of a micrograft. So I started analyzing the results. These are patients who underwent only micrografts. We found that the plugs, the mini grafts, the micro is producing a much better aesthetic result. But there was only thing, the lack of density. So once that happened, over a period of a year, then I realized that maybe you have to combine the mini grafts with the micrografts to get density as well as the aesthetic result. So all these was just, trial and error. But by the time I started doing this, I suddenly found somebody had come out with what's called a follicular unit. And then the follicle became the buzzword. And to isolate the follicular unit, I had to put the micromotor to rest. And that was the death of the micromotor in my hands. And what was being used for about almost close to 10 to 15 years, suddenly I found that I had to really go for a strip and then use magnification and then start isolating the follicle. It was very depressing, as you know, that you learn something, you're mastering it, and then you find something else is happening. So we now used the parallel blades, not a single technician, but we had 2, 3 of them. We increased it. And instead of excising multiple strips as we did earlier, we started using parallel blades, but with spacers. And then just a word of caution, with somebody was telling, are you using sterile technique? Absolutely. I do in a theater setup. You find that this is my colleague, Dr. Ravi. He's fully draped, gowned, sterile technique. There's nothing unsterile. As plastic surgeons, we detest anything which is quasi-sterile or unsterile. And we cannot have 2 sets of rules, one for hair transplant and one for a lipo or one for a breast implant. So the same rules apply. So I do everything in a sterile area and everybody is gowned, including the nurses. And these are examples of when we started isolating the follicular units. And in the meantime, what was happening was the donor scars were becoming a problem. So that is when we found that, this is a typical rebel who didn't have good results and he shaved his head. And then you walk around with this, kya ho gaya? Then you say, yeah, this is the result of hair transplant by strip. So that was how the FUE started evolving. And initially, you all know it was a 3-step procedure, which was a sharp and a dull punch. And then manual FUE was very time consuming. I started to practice. I said, okay, now I have to learn this. Again, being a rebel that I was, I said, okay, but I may be a strip surgeon, but I'm going to do FUE. So I was one of those few people in the so-called aged bracket who still embraced FUE. But in a corporate hospital, the time was critical and I was using manual punch. But the day Harris Safe Scribe came in, I found that this was my answer because I found that the motor was back. And that was something which was so exciting that the motor which was relegated had now come back. And I was able to harvest a large number of grafts with FUE. And you can see that many of these grafts, they are looking so good. When I saw the FUE grafts, I was ecstatic. The scars of strips were no longer there. The healing of donor site was quicker. The numbness was less. So everything favorable. And I thought FUE is the way to go. And these are patients on whom I did only FUE. And FUE opened up other areas. It could be used in isolation, or you could mix it up with scalp hairs or increase density. And then I used like for like. Supposing I was taking from the beard, I put it for the mustache scar area, or sometimes for increasing density, as you can see over here. So it looked like we had found a perfect answer. And this is what I mentioned. I started with a punch with 4 mm. I went through mini, went to micro, went to strip, went to FUT, follicular unit, or FUSS as we call it, and then finally came back to FUE. So it's a big cycle for me. But did FUE provide the perfect answer? That is what I was looking at. But then there were drawbacks. The drawbacks were, some thinning, sometimes scars if they are over-harvested, overzealous harvesting. And my biggest complaint was this, and I think Dr. Sam also highlighted, and I've been a very strong proponent that this is the culprit. The culprit is not operating within the safe area. You can see how much the area is recessed over here, and then you have harvested up to here. This is from Artas. And you can see that this is obviously the second sitting because there are dots of the healed areas already there. So my complaint is this. So my present take, in patients with lax scalp, I would prefer FUT, or sequential FUE and FUT, because I also believe in that. In patients with more crown thinning, where there is a heavy activity on the crown in a younger patient, I would still prefer FUT, because I would say that I would be confined to the donor area better if I'm doing FUT, especially if in a patient who is exhibiting crown thinning, because that's the culprit. That's the one that is going to come down and encroach onto the safe donor area. I feel that the safe donor area is being violated while doing extensive FUE in the attempt to harvest large number of grafts. This is my take on this. So this is something I've already presented. I started doing FUE and FUT even at a time when so I feel this is a good learning curve. Every time you have a strip, you also do FUE, so you're not losing touch with it, so it helped me. And I used to harvest bits, it's not the entire strip in one go. I have a way of doing it. I take about 100 grafts of FUE, then I take a strip, because I'm calculating the length, the width, and what my colleague actually calculates and tells what is available in terms of grafts in that particular strip which I've harvested, which could be 2 centimeters. And there could be variations in the width of the strip, because some areas, like a mastoid area, is a little tight. I might keep a little lesser width there and then go to a larger width as we go down. So the ability to perform both methods has helped me in decision making. And I discuss both the options and suggest the method which I feel is the best for the patient. However, the patient finally decides whichever method he wants. My job is to tell him. Where are we heading? Well, better medicines, obviously, hair cloning, culture. I don't know. Nobody has a perfect answer at this point. But I'm sure if we thought that we have reached some end point, it's totally wrong. It has been a fascinating experience. Many times it has been frustrating. Just as you feel you have come to terms with the technique, you realize that something new has arrived. Many times I had to leave the comfort zone and unlearn what I had learned. And that is extremely difficult, because once you learn something, it's very difficult. You try to hold on to it. It's like a lap surgeon and an open surgeon trying to convince that he will still do it. He'll still do it without doing a lap surgery, but somewhere he gets lost. So you have to unlearn. The only thing that is constant is change. You have to change. You can't live on your past glories. You have to keep changing. You have to be innovative. But when you see a smile, you know that the journey has been worthwhile. It was a roller coaster ride for me, taking up cosmetic surgery as a specialty way back in '86 when it was unknown. And more importantly, hair transplant, especially having never been trained, has made me even more memorable and worthwhile journey. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's a lot to learn from this journey, and the lesson is every day you have to learn, you have to keep changing, changing and changing. Nothing is absolute on date today. Tomorrow, which you feel absolute, may change. So I invite Dr. Dhami, sir. Dr. Dhami, sir. To felicitate Dr. Ram, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So before we start, a couple of announcements to be made. We have a very interesting skit to be done by doctors from 5:15 to 6 p.m. So I request everybody to stay back. And immediately following the skit, we have the AGM, that is the annual general body meeting. So all the members are requested to stay back for the annual general body meeting, and we can discuss. The banquet will start at 8 o'clock sharp. Yeah, 8 o'clock. So 8 o'clock sharp, we start the banquet here only. And so let's go on to the non-scalp restoration. We all have seen the scalp restoration. So I invite Dr. Anil Garg, sir, who's the moderator of the session. Kindly moderate the session, please.
My dear friends, there will be very beautiful skit today evening, so don't run away, please. We have made lot of efforts. You will see many ghosts over here and many interesting thing, I think. So it will be a good thing. So tell your other colleagues who are not here, and we are trying, this is the first time in HairCon making educational program through ghost. So anyone has got any question, we can take just roughly by the time they comes. Especially those who have come first time, second time or third time, if they have any query in their mind, they can ask question. Next. Ram sir, facial hair restoration.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to briefly speak about facial hair transplant. And of course, it was a topic which was having some overlaps, but I find that the couple is not ready with it, so I will see whatever I have and present it to you. Basically, facial hair includes eyebrows, eyelashes, beard, and mustache. And I'm going to discuss only two areas, the beard and the mustache restoration. I think most of you are familiar with the indications: congenital, scar alopecia, traction, and sometimes long-standing areata if it's under control. The zones of the beard, this is actually a picture taken from Kapil's article, which has come in the book. So I think most of you have seen this and you're also familiar. Typically, the goatee area, the cheek, and the mustache areas are the ones that are commonly addressed. The portion, the under neck, is usually not something which we work on that often. So these are the priorities areas. Typically, the transplanted hairs are usually single-haired. Some of them could be two-haired units to increase density. A word about the caliber of the beard hair. We all know that it's larger in diameter and also a little triangular in shape. Hopefully, you can see this is the beard, and this is scalp hair. Persons with very good beard, some of them have 2s and even occasionally 3 head follicles. On an average, it usually is around 500 follicles, and sometimes it could go up to 2,000 depending upon the area of coverage. The donor area is usually the posterior mid-scalp, and procedure of harvesting could either be strip or FUE. If it's a very small area, like it's a scar alopecia, then, and if he has got a good beard, then we could harvest beard hair itself for replacement, and that is of course by FUE. The method of harvesting, you could either use blocks, or you could use only field block or local blocks of auricular, temporal, and mental nerves. And also, because of the fact that the facial tissues are not as stable as harvesting in the scalp, we need to tumesce the area to reduce the bleeding. And also, if you're harvesting from the beard area, we need to tumesce if it's going to be a small area for just for the scar. Otherwise, if you're harvesting from the scalp, it's the routine procedure. But in the recipient area, when you're harvesting, you need to tumesce to reduce the bleeding. You can either use preformed slits or stick and place, or use implanters. I use stick and place because that's what I've been doing for all the areas. Instrumentation, in my surgeries, it's usually 21 and 23 gauge needles for single hairs and 19 or 20 for 2 head follicles. Of course, the important thing is the angulation. They are very, very acutely angled and almost parallel to the skin. And as far as the direction of hair growth, I think it's very good to evaluate a normal beard disposition to see how the angulation changes, so that you can replicate it when you're actually doing the transplant. The technical difficulties when you're doing the beard, it's basically the challenge of giving local anesthesia. So you either put Primla and then you can add a ring block, or you're going to talk about a local field block, or you're going to do nerve blocks, depending on what you're comfortable with. Tumescence, as I told you, will help. Stretching of the tissues is extremely important because the slits don't remain that open, and so that is a little bit of a challenge. And sometimes the bleeding is a little bit more. Usually we feel that male patients in the beard areas, there's a tendency to bleed. There could be temporary paresis, especially if there's a drift of the local. It's something which you should be aware of, and also the patient should know about it, that if it's something you need not be alarmed about. This is just a brief video to illustrate single hair follicles being introduced. As I told you, I do a stick and place. A little different technique is I usually remove the needle. I don't guide the hair along the needle. The needle is completely removed from the opening, and then the hair is introduced. I've just developed that method, so I use it that way. I don't slide it like a shoehorn. This is another place where I've done the single hair graft. This is for the filtral area. So you can see that majority of them will be single hairs, and also to increase density in between, you can put 2 head follicles. So if you're using an implanter, that is also okay, but if you're making preformed slits, it's a little difficult unless you make larger holes to accommodate this, otherwise it will be difficult to visualize. Post-op care is you need typically antibiotics and analgesics. I do put them on oral steroids to reduce the swelling, and I advise them soft food with minimal chewing or more of liquids, preferably not to use straw, but direct swallowing is advisable. No brushing of teeth except by using finger, and use of mouthwash. I'm going to show you some pictures, mustache restoration, and here we have used the scalp hair. So this is the immediate post-op, and this is the result probably around 8 or 9 months. So I'll just run through a few pictures just for you to get an idea of how the growth is in all these areas. Only for the increased peripheral density, and also he didn't have much hair in the philtrum. This is a patient who had a scar alopecia, is a post-traumatic, and again using scalp hair. I don't think there is any major issue with growth in the scar, except that sometimes if the scar tissue is very dense, then the penetration becomes a little more difficult. You just need to check whether the vascularity is reasonably there. It need not be that it should bleed. And the key to it is to use very fine needles so that you minimize the devascularization. Larger needles will produce more damage. Okay, using beard hair, this is again for smaller areas in the philtrum. Obviously, you know, you can see the caliber of this hair is much thicker, and he also has a reasonable growth of beard. So this would be a good option to use, supposing we are doing in such patients. If he didn't have a beard, obviously, we have to use scalp hair. Again, very dense beard. So he had a cleft, so we have used beard hair to do replacement on the scar. Similarly, in this patient, again a cleft patient. Usually, you know, cleft people, there is a lot of skin, especially in the filtral area where there is no hair, so you can see the hair growth. Similarly, in this patient also. Using scalp hair for the beard. So in this patient, we have done for the beard, both the sides, and a little bit improvement on the goatee area. He actually has a scar in the mustache area, but he was not very particular. He was more particular that he has a full beard. This is another patient where we have done scalp hair for beard. So if you don't trim it, then obviously it grows long, but you can trim it and keep it to a reasonable level. So it makes them feel comfortable that there is some growth, which many of them feel psychologically affected if the growth is not there. So in conclusion, scalp or facial hair can be the donor area. In scar alopecia, facial hair will offer the better match. Both methods can be used. Technically a little more demanding, but I would say the results are gratifying. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Aman, is that ready now? Aapka hai? Kapil now. Planning and executing the beard and the mustaches.
Sorry, the other file has been corrupted and it is not being uploaded. And there's a lot of overlap. I think Ram sir has already covered. You copied me. Thank you. It's a compliment, and I take it. So sites for restoring body hair, we have got body hair restoration can be done for the eyebrows, eyelashes, mustache, beard, chest, and even the pubic area. And as per the ISHS survey, up to 7 to 8% of the people are undergoing facial hair transplants. And I would just like to draw the attention that in the Middle East, this is a very, very common procedure. So in the surveys, it was found that in the Middle East, this procedure is being done more in comparison to the other areas. So indications, sir has already covered, but I will just like to highlight a couple of them again. And I would like to skip the areas which he has already covered. Surgical traumas, traction alopecia, congenital hypotrichia, or cosmetic reasons. The patient may have a good density after the first surgery, but I still want the second surgery to be done. Trauma. And when it comes to the characteristic of the hair, we know that the hair diameter is more than the scalp hair, and the mustache hair diameter is still more. It's more heavier as compared to the beard hair. Anagen phase lasts for 4 to 14 weeks, and the telogen phase lasts for 10 to 18 weeks. In mustache, the main problem which we encounter is while planning is to give the anesthesia. Before that, in fact, what I'm trying to do nowadays is when the patient comes or when we have to do the surgery, I tell him to draw what all areas does he want. So that helps me to, when he draws with his own hand that which area he wants to be covered, then it becomes easier for me to understand what does he, where does he want the hair to be placed. Another thing is that in beard reconstruction, we have to be careful what will be the direction of the hair. So if you see, when you start from the side bun, they are down, and by the time you reach cheek beard, they tend to go posteriorly and inferiorly. And by the time you come in the goatee area, they are almost inferiorly placed. So you have to keep this thing in mind while making the slits and planning and discussing with the patient. In the face, anesthesia is more painful. Nerve blocks with 2% lignocaine or 1% with epinephrine have been used, less amounts to be used. And anatomy of face, we have to take care of these nerves. On the motor facial, we have this, but this is the area where we are going to work. So mental nerve block can be given, buccal nerve block can be given, infraorbital nerve block can be given, and an auriculotemporal block can also be given. In the infraorbital block, you have to give around 1 to 2 cc between the canine and the first premolar by lifting the lip upwards and giving an anesthesia over there. This anesthetizes the upper lip and mustache. The mental block can be given in direct line with the second bicuspid premolar on the lower side, and this will anesthetize the lower lip and the chin. Auriculotemporal nerve, needle is inserted 1.5 centimeters anterior to the ear at the level of tragus behind the superficial temporal artery pulsation. You should feel this artery before giving the injection. And this anesthetizes the parotid gland and the external ear. Buccal nerve block given by injecting around 2 to 3 centimeters lateral and superior to the angle of the mouth. This will anesthetize the cheek area. For donor harvesting, scalp is the most important area, and if there is a limited number of grafts are required, then you can even use the beard. I prefer to use, I do use 2 hair grafts as well, or pair them up in the center of the beard. So I am not averse to using 2 hair grafts. Strip or FUE technique can be used, and facial hair or the beard can be used, as sir has already said. When we are making the recipient sites, I try to use as small a blade as possible, maybe 0.8, and I prefer to give the coronal slits as compared to the sagittal slits. The reason for that is that with the coronal slit, the cross section of the slit which is formed is less as compared to that of the sagittal slit. Advantage for that is that when you put in the graft, it fits in more snugly in the coronal slit in this area, because there is a high tendency for the graft to slightly come out and the skin becoming bumpy, or which is called as cobblestoning of the skin. Superior outline of the beard single hair grafts, make sure that you do the feathering the way you have for the hairline. Very superficially injected tumescence is important to increase the skin turgidity and provide stability, and it can increase the post-operative ecchymosis though. Apply traction and counter traction as the facial skin is very loose, but this may cause distortion in the angle or direction of the sides. And coronal slits, as I have already shared, is better off. The density in the beard around 25 to 30 follicular units, and mustache we tend to give slightly more density. Maximum density is given in the philtrum and central part of the beard or the chin. The grafts which are required, mustache around 350 to 500, full goatee around 600 to 700, sideburns each side 2 to 250, and cheek beard around 6 to 700. So when you total this up, this will come around 2000 to 2500 grafts, and that is the normal size of my case. For implantation, as shared earlier, single hair grafts along the border. 2 hair grafts or paired follicular units can be used if the scalp hair are thin. This is a slow process, and implantation in this area takes much more time as compared to that of the implantation on the scalp. So there are 2 reasons. One, the skin is very loose, so it takes 1.5 times. Plus, it is difficult for 2 people to implant at the same time. So their hand keep on colluding. So as a result of which, the speed is slow. Post-op results, no post-op restrictions to eating or chewing habits, although the patient do experience the drooling of saliva because wherever we inject the anesthesia, that side becomes paralyzed for some time, or there is a paresis of the facial nerve. And I have heard some people are quite afraid, those who have not done the head and neck surgeries, that they don't even attempt for the beard hair transplants because they think the paresis can be permanent. So let me remind you, facial nerve is quite deep. I have done a lot of parotid surgeries, and there is very negligible chance of damaging the facial nerve. So you can easily give the anesthesia in this area. Results start coming just like the normal hair, and I feel that they are usually good because the face is a highly vascular organ. So the chances of having a good result is more. Facial skin very delicate, so change in angulation during healing may occur. This is one of the important points which we have to tell the patient, that sometimes there might be some bumpiness, and I would be happy to share that some doctors, there was a doctor who came to me and a couple of more patients, when I tell them there might be some bumpiness, they even refuse the surgery. But I feel it is better off that they refuse the surgery now rather than leading in a problem later on. And in case cobblestoning does occur, you might do a microdermabrasion or you might do a CO2 laser as well. So these are the two modalities still available with which you can treat the patient. Cicatricial alopecia, patients should be warned about repeat sittings, and anti-androgens can have a paradoxical effect on these areas. So stop finasteride. So this is a immediate pre-op picture of around 2000 grafts full case. Immediate post-op, another picture. After 1 week, you can see it is coming up. So this is a full-blown result. And then after 6 months, this is the result. And this is 1 year. And I would like to again welcome you all to join us in Panama. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapil. Next is Dr. Bhavna.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about body hair harvesting today. This topic has been covered in the morning to quite an extent. I'm just going to be dotting down certain points for newbies like us who are new to the world of body hair harvesting. So when do we use body hair? So in patients with the poor donor area, in transplantation of certain areas like eyebrows and temple region where finer and shorter hair length body hair may be preferred, to reconstruct small areas of baldness in beard where beard hair can be utilized, to cover scars arising from previous strip surgery on scalp, to prevent over-harvesting from scalp, and to plan mega and giga sessions for advanced grades of baldness. So the question arises, do body hair really grow? So answer is yes, the transplanted hair do grow, as these hair are not dependent on the levels of DHT, and also due to the donor dominance concept, which is basically the ability of the transplanted autografts to maintain the integrity and the characteristics of the donor site. But the different body areas have different success rates, and because of the difference in anagen and telogen ratio of hair in various sites, so sometimes unpredictable cosmetic results can be seen. The hair also becomes longer, which is beautifully explained by the concept of the recipient dominance, which states that the recipient dermis influences the body hair growth and the hair cycle duration to mimic the characteristic of the recipient site. But in this, there have been no studies which show that there are changes in thickness of the body hair. It mainly shows that the length of the hair increases definitely. So what are the different sources of body hair? So I think the picture is not showing here, but mainly include beard and chest, then abdomen, there are suprapubic areas, armpits, even legs and arms can be used as different sources. Sorry. So beard, head, arms and legs. So how to select them? So we mainly select them by the percentage of the anagen and the telogen ratio. So in body hair, normally the anagen is smaller, and because of the shorter anagen phases, the body hair tends to grow thinner and slower. So as seen in the table, we can see that the beard is the only other hair which matches to the anagen phase of the scalp hair. The others are mainly in the telogen phase. So the anagen lasts for very few months. That's why the beard hair serves as a better source for body hair harvesting. So when we are looking for maximum yield and density, beard hair are the best sources. And however, for certain areas where a cosmetic match is the main aim, certain surgeons do prefer to use chest hair or leg hair for a better result. So where and how to place the body hair. So implantation is done using in the ratio of 1:1 scalp is to body hair. So for example, in a mega session of 3000 to 4000 grafts, you can take out 2000 to 2500 from the scalp and the remaining from the body. So we prefer to place the scalp hair in the frontal hairline. So we prefer to do somewhere around 1000 to 1500 in the frontal hairline. In the mid scalp, you can use only body hair, or you can combine it in the ratio of 1:1. Over the crown area, you can combine in the ratio of 2:1, which has been discussed in the morning. So if body hair are only available, like in redo cases, then we prefer to use the beard hair for the most important areas to give coverage, but with a lesser density of 25 to 30 follicle units per centimeter square. It has been found out in certain studies that a higher density can affect the growth of the body hair later on. So beard as a donor area. The pros of beard as a donor area is it has a better healing and a faster healing. I find even within 4 to 5 days, the donor area has healed pretty nicely. The survival rate is universally high for the beard hair. The cons are there are atypical whorls, there is variable hair exit angle, and there is hypermobility of the beard skin, which requires a lot of practice and experience for newbies like us to get it right and to reduce our transaction rates. So the pearls for beard extraction is, firstly, we should be able to recognize the blush of the anagen hair. So wet shaving 2 to 3 days prior to the surgery helps us recognize the hair in the anagen phase. As the hair is placed more superiorly in body hair, so prefer to use smaller and sharp punches and with shallow insertions. This helps us to reduce the transaction rate. Countertraction and tumescence both play an important role. I find in beard countertraction has given me better stability for reducing the transaction, whereas in chest I prefer tumescence as a better tool. So we should always match the angle and the direction of hair to reduce our transactions. Now chest as a donor area, there are very few scores which are available to assess the body hair as such. So one of the indexes is also donor index, which has been given by Dr. Robert True, which defines the chest hair in density, texture, 2 to 3 hair follicular units, surface area and the hair length. So for individuals who fare a score of 5 to 8 on this index are good candidates for chest hair extraction, whereas less than 4 is not deemed suitable, it's not a suitable candidate for chest hair extraction. So now chest as a donor area compared to the other body hair, with the exception of beard, it has a better density, it has lesser transaction and longer growth after transplantation. Many studies support that the chest hair is the only body hair which has actually, we have seen that the hair growth is longer when implanted into the scalp. So the complications include infections, the overdose of the anesthesia, bruising, ecchymosis, which can prevail for some time. Swelling and the discomfort to the patient is more. Bleeding can occur, definitely. Upon healing, hypo and hyperpigmented scars are visible, and hypertrophic scars, especially in the sternal area of the chest, can be there. Ingrown hair if the buried grafts are left behind, asymmetric reduction of body hair, and poor results. So the limitations of body hair harvesting is that it is a slower process. There is operator fatigue, there is team fatigue. So we recommend that you divide the session into multiple halves or into multiple day surgery. The higher transaction rate, smaller graft yield and more graft requirement is there as the single and double follicular units are mainly present. And the patient satisfaction may vary because if you're looking for a coverage, then the patient are mostly satisfied. If they're looking for a very high density, body hair does not give us that end result. So the take-home points are that we transplant a mixture of different body hair with scalp hair for a blended look. Please encourage the patients to keep a shorter hairstyle as the body hair tends to grow out wavy and does not really merge well with the scalp hair. Beard hair gives us a better optimal density, and we should always check for our transaction when we are harvesting from the body at periodic intervals and adjust accordingly as the exit angle may vary from site to site. So these are a few results of the body hair transplant done in mega and giga sessions. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that when we are planning for body hair harvesting, we should include the identification of the donor areas, the requirement that we're going to take from the donor areas, use of mixture of body hair and scalp hair. Patient should be counseled well. He should be motivated as it is a very prolonged surgery, and he should understand the limitation of the results which are there. So more and more studies are required to actually predict the long-term survival and the growth of body hair harvesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Nice presentation. Now, Dr. Sukhbir for eyelash.
Thank you, Anil sir. So we'll be going on to an interesting topic, eyelash restoration. So could I know how many of you have done or are seeking to do an eyelash restoration? Quite less number. Okay. I think eyebrow everybody would be doing. Eyebrow? Great. So why eyelash transplant? See, eyelash aesthetics is very, very important. It's a sign of beauty. And if you see in quite a lot of population, Saudi population, there's like too much, it's a sign of beauty and they consider it to be too much for that. It is associated with increased attractiveness, confidence, well-being. There are numerous options available how to improve the appearance. It might be only cosmetic, or maybe you do in some traumatic or infective cases when you need to do restoration of the eyelash. So eyelashes on the upper eyelid vary from the lower eyelid because the upper eyelashes on the upper lid is much more as compared to the lower eyelid. Usually on the upper eyelid we have a 2 row of eyelashes, about an average of 8 mm. They tend to curve upwards. It's about 70 to 100 eyelashes in the upper eyelid, whereas in the lower eyelid it's only 60 to 80 lashes. So surgical eyelash transplant can be indicated in patients like these who have a case of post-infection, they lost their eyelashes, or it can be just a pure cosmetic indication. Patient wants to just enhance the eyelashes, they want to increase the density. Again, population who are living in UAE and all, they seek a lot of, we get patients seeking a lot of these interventions for only cosmetic purposes only. So we have a lot of options. We have surgical mainly, that's the eyelash restoration, and non-surgical including artificial eyelashes, which I feel in a metropolitan like Delhi, it's very, very common now. Almost all the patients who are coming for some or the other form of cosmetic procedures, I don't know about other states, but in Delhi the incidence is very, very high. And lash extender nowadays, we can see, we have Bimatoprostol ophthalmic solution 0.03%, which is used to enhance and increase the density of your eyelash, and mascara, which ladies commonly use. So as surgeons, we'll go on to the first, the eyelash transplant. That is the surgical procedure, and then I'll just share a few slides on the artificial eyelashes. Obviously, artificial, whenever you use, you have a lot of complications associated with that as compared to your surgical restoration, which is a very natural thing. It's autologous, so obviously chance of complications are quite less if due diligence is followed. So eyelash transplant is to improve the appearance of your eyelashes. It is basically transfer of the follicles. Again, the concept is same from the scalp to your eyelid. Normally single hair follicles are used. Even if you take out double, just split into single hair follicles, and usually 2 rows can be done. Important aspect of doing the eyelash transplant is that never transplant all the hairs in a same row. Same level. It should be slightly zigzag, to retain the aesthetic appearance of the eyelash. That's very important. Also, the curvature is very important. If you do not follow proper curvature, it can lead to trichiasis, which can be later on very painful for the patient, and you might have to even remove that. It can undergo some infection also, so you have to be very, very careful on that. So the transplanted hair lashes, they retain the qualities of scalp hair, so obviously they tend to grow quite long. So you have to tell the patient, you have to trim it regularly, and they have to curl also. Initial couple of months at least, they should curl it, so it follows that regular pattern. Complications can be pain, bleeding, formation of, can be some numbness can be there for temporary point. Eyeleptosis has been documented but quite rare. So let's go on to the anesthesia part of it. So the anesthesia is very simple. You just give just above the eyelash margin, all along the eyelash margin. So you can give directly Xalocin with Adaline because the amount of solution used is very, very limited. So I use typically diluted 1 in 2 lakh Adaline. So that takes care. I don't have to give too much tumescence here. there's no point, because anyway the swelling will be coming because of the inflammation of the procedure itself. So don't give too much of tumescence. You can add slight Kinocort to your this thing just to decrease the swelling, or followed by post-op compressions that can take care of that. Icing and all is more than enough. So going on to the procedure itself, use a corneal eye shield. Can be transparent corneal eye shield, or there are various type of corneal eye shield. You can take it from your ophthalmologist or wherever, or you can also use a very thin strip of cotton, wet it properly, and then you can use as a layering for the cornea. Curve your needle, that's very important. Now the important aspect is, I'll just start the video in a second. You have to curl it from up to down, but the important part is you have to go to the full thickness, sparing the tarsal plate. So best is you have to lift, you have to support the eyelid, curl it properly, full thickness, go around where you have to take out, and then assistant has to be ready immediately with the graft, and it just pushes the graft inside. So just switch on the video for that. Yeah. So I'm making that curl, and my assistant is just pushing the graft inside. So if you see, the levels are unequal. I'm not following the regular pattern. I'm not putting all the grafts at same level. So this was a pure cosmetic enhancing procedure. This is not a traumatic. So we have done a couple of traumatic in post-infective cases also. Some we have done acid burn. 1 or 2 clients only have done, not many of acid burn victims. So be very sure that you have to spare the tarsal plate. That's very important. You should not injure the tarsal plate at any go. That's very, very important. Okay. So this is typically 24 hours post-op. Yes, some amount of swelling is there, which is very, very common. So we can just give some cold compresses. That's very easy. And some anti-inflammatories for 3 to 5 days takes care of the job. You don't have to worry too much that patient will have too much bruising, or there's a problem that, so they can wear black goggles. Typically that was what I advise for first 1 week. That takes care of the problem. So typically after 12 months. So complications can be folliculitis, bleeding, scarring. Iridosis has been documented, very, very rare. One of the other problems can occur, which is not written here. Tarsal plate can have an injury, can prolong the inflammation quite long. So lift the eyelid completely, go through full thickness, sparing the tarsal plate. And trichiasis can occur if your direction of insertion is not proper. It can lead to trichiasis, which can lead to later on irritation of the eyelid. So artificial eyelashes nowadays, as I told you, is very, very common. In a metropolitan like Delhi, we get who is coming for cosmetic procedures. I typically see them having artificial eyelashes on that. So it can be adhered either to dermal margin or to individual eyelashes. We don't do it, so don't ask me on that. So it can lead to some of the complications like contact dermatitis, very, very common. So before the eyelash transplant, if somebody has artificial eyelash, I had 2 cases like that. So tell the patient to go back to the person who has actually advised them or put the artificial eyelashes on the individual thing, let them remove it, give a period of at least 7 days, and then do a eyelash transplant, because inflammation will be there, and especially when they remove it, typically that scarring will be there. So either you can add some PRP during the procedure, or just insert the graft in PRP and then do that. So that's what I follow in 2 cases which I have done for the patients who have come for removal of artificial eyelashes, and then we have done the transplant for that. So this is lash extender. These are not my pictures, just taken it. So this is my fabulous stylish eyelash extensions which are being used. Okay, Bimatoprost will go. There are a lot of solutions which patients can use to just enhance their eyelash. It's FDA approved indication for enhancing patient's own eyelashes. Basically, this was an ophthalmic solution initially, which was used to reduce the elevated intraocular pressure. But then they found that it is a prostaglandin analog and helps to increase the vascularity and can be used to enhance your eyelash and increase the density and fullness of your eyelash. So there was a study which was done published in Aesthetic Journal, Plastic Surgery Journal 2011 also. They did a dermal administration to the upper eyelid margins in a multicentric double-blinded randomized control trial It was a study of 278 adult patients which was done over a period of 16 weeks, and they found that within a period of 4 to 6 months, they had a dramatic improvement and the thickness of the eyelash also improved. So mechanism of action not very well known, but they have seen that the duration of the anagen phase is much prolonged. It also stimulates the melanogenesis. That's why the pigmentation, it becomes much more lustrous, and it cannot be used in patients with any systemic diseases. Mascara, again, ladies do use it to darken, thicken, available easily in the market. Eyelashes, combination of waxes, pigments, or resins. Just to conclude, eyelashes is a very, very important part of the facial aesthetics. Prominent eyelashes are considered a sign of beauty in various religions and all. A sign of attractiveness, confidence, well-being. And there are numerous options, surgical and non-surgical, which I've discussed to improve the eyelashes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Nice presentation, Sukhbir.
Thank
Now I
you.
invite all the panelists on the dais for the discussion. Ram sir, Kapil, Aman, Sukhbir, Dr. Bhavna. Do you want to go? Kapil? Aman? So nowadays this has become very important part. Not only we are doing the scalp, but we need to restore all the parts of the body. Recently I was in Cancun and I saw the all area, possible area of the body where the hair are, they have been demanded for the hair transplant. Means the abdominal area, pubic area, thigh, leg, and all the transplant were done in all those areas. Especially the Alex Ginsberg presented a long series of his cases in which all the area from where we harvest, he reconstruct those areas. So first of all, I would like to ask to the panelists, what are the most common area other than the beard you have done? Beard means the facial scar, and other than any area like the chest, abdominal, pubic. Anyone? Yes, Ram sir.
I have done one case of pubic hair.
Pubic hair, okay.
Chest hair implantation.
Chest hair implantation. Yeah, that's what we are
Yeah,
talking about.
there was this guy whose wife liked chest hair, so he
Yeah.
kept on having 2-3 sessions of chest hair.
Yeah, that's the most common demand by either their girlfriend or by wife, that they like the hair. And Kapil sir, you wanted to say something? Any other?
I was going to talk of the same patient. He came to us saying that he wants a transplant for his wife. He's just trying to test. But slowly he had 3 sessions and a chest full of hair. So apart from beard and mustache, eyebrow is the number 2 thing that we do. Other than the beard and mustache.
Yeah. So other than the
Armpits
face,
is another area where I have done, and one was in a conference.
was there any experience with the transgender patient?
Yes, I have done maybe just 2-3.
2, 3 for hairline,
Only hairline.
For hairline.
Hairline.
lowering the hairline,
Hairline.
not for the other area.
One was a traumatic eyebrow, one side in a transgender.
Genetic eyebrow. So the most important aspect of the things which has to be kept in the mind, why the Dr. Kapil and Aman and Dr. Ram sir also said, for the beard and mustaches reconstruction is the important angle and the direction of hair that has to be kept in mind. Can you elaborate next again how to maintain the precise angle and the direction, what care should be taken so that they grow in a proper angle and the direction? Kapil?
So I think when we make the slits, it is important to make it as parallel to the skin as possible. And in order to do that, what I do, I use a cut to size blade. So if this is the blade, I will hold it from this point so that my hand can easily come below. If I hold it close to the fulcrum, as you say, this finger will come in between and it will be by default at an angle.
Yeah, this is an important
So
point.
to increase this angle, exit angle, I will do like this. So try to hold this blade handle from as far as the blade connects.
At the top of the handle, you put your index finger and then go in.
Make the slits like
So parallel to the skin. And
Coronal
what about the
slits.
needle? What of the, don't you think that if you make with the needle, it is much easier to
Yes,
maintain the angle?
I sometimes make it with the needle as well. When I bent it, two bent, not the three bent like Sam Lam
Yeah.
showed. Two bent I do use sometimes, depending on what is the size of the case. But I still feel that because I make the slits first and then my team implants, so I feel more comfortable with
More
this.
comfortable with the blade.
I use needles.
Needles. Ram sir, you want to say something? You don't make the slit because you yourself implant
I
in
do
all
it
the
myself,
cases.
So it doesn't matter.
So you don't need.
So it's also the position of the patient.
Yes.
It's not just your hand and handle. It is like how much is the patient tilted down and, you know, chin up. So you are able to make it more flatter. I mean, you have to make a perfect sight.
Means changing the direction, position of the
Position
face.
of the patient, like-
as the area changes.
If the neck is
so you-
more extended, you can easily make more flat sights, I think.
So whatever you do, whatever technique you adopt for yourself, the end message that direction and the angle has to be precisely monitored, that you are putting in the right direction, otherwise they will look bad. Another third point, while as far as the hair is concerned, the curvature of the hair, that is the third point which we should see: direction, angulation and the curvature. These are the three things. So what precaution you take for maintaining the proper curvature of the hair? Yes.
Sir, the point is which I discussed in the morning, that when you are taking out the FUE graft, you have to look out for the bulge area. So the bulge has to go down. So that shows that the
Down means clarify down
down means towards the skin.
towards the skin,
Towards the skin, so that the hair can come out and flush the skin rather than going the other way.
going other way. Or you can, yes, Aman, you want to say other than this?
Immediately in the post-op period, I advise the patients to apply gel in that area repeatedly during the day, so that the hair becomes flush with the skin. At times it has a tendency to stick out. You know, this area is a mobile area. I mean, you eat, you smile, you cough, yeah, and all the time the grafts are in a movement. So they're not exactly kind of sticking to where you place them, and they have a tendency to get pushed out of the slits. So, and at times you could be surprised at why you got a cobblestoning. You could have done a perfect case, and still in the end you find that, you know, the undulated skin is there. So you can never predict that it will be 100% flawless. You have to explain cobblestoning. And all this gel, I give aloe vera gel to the patient. Initial 5-7 days is antibiotic, and so that they keep
How-
applying, so to keep the
How
angle
many days
down.
after you advise patient to do this massage?
Sir, for first 5 to 7 days, it is antibiotic cream only, because you don't want any other external.
Right from the
thing.
next day they can apply the
Gel,
antibiotic.
and make sure that the angle is down.
Angle is the down. So right from the second day, means antibiotic, topical antibiotic ointment or a gel, and after 7-8 days,
Aloe vera gel.
and when you advise the face wash,
Face wash, as long as they don't disturb the area, I mean, it's always better to wait for 5 days for a proper face wash, else we give a spray.
spray. Okay. Ram sir, do you do any extra precautions to maintain the curvature?
See, since I'm doing the planting myself, so I exactly know if there is a hair having a specific curvature and I feel that that has to be placed more posteriorly to follow that, then I will use it that way. So I will use the curvature of the hair based on the area where I'm planting, and since I'm doing it, I know, looking at it, where this will fit best. So I don't have any issues on that.
Sukhbir?
No, I don't follow any special precautions, it's just
That.
I do
So first thing means that the few points to take care of the curvature. One thing, you can take little longer hair shaft, a follicle having the longer hair shaft, so you know where the hair is curving. Second point, as the couple told, that about the sebaceous glands or the bulge area, you take care of that, and the bulge area should face to the skin. Third point is, either you use, whatever you use, the angled means blade or a needle. When while creating the slit, they should be parallel to it. The Aman pointed out the point that not only this angle of blade and the needle is important, but the posture of the patient is also important. in maintaining your curvature.
Another point,
And the best part is if you can do, yourself, a surgeon can do themselves, especially the mustaches area and the few important area of the beard, I think that will be good.
also one point.
What is meant by bulge area should face to the skin?
Yes.
When you see under the magnification, when you see under loops, you are able to see that on one side the bulge is more prominent as compared to the other side, because the hair are coming out like this, and when the punch will go inside, this is the area where you will have the more hair or more bulge or more protrusion, because the punch is going to go like this. It was just
Sebaceous
shown in
gland or
Sperringini.
bulges?
It was shown in Sperringini's video yesterday. So there is a difference in the protrusion or the bulge which is available, and I make sure that protrusion or the bulge is more toward the downside or the concave side, and it is placed concave down.
2 points here. See, this bulge is just a description. There really is no bulge.
This is,
It's just a location in human beings. Second is, how does it matter whether it is upside or if you imagine a three-dimensional structure, that bulge area is actually all round.
Yes, sir.
Ha. So what is meant by towards the skin? Because it is there on the other side also.
So the most,
No,
No,
as,
sir.
As per the I have once.
low, yes.
No, what I have observed during the surgery, and especially after Moro's video 2 years back, that when you introduce the punch, there's a difference in the, size of the bulge which is left. And it corresponds to, in such a way, even though it is three-dimensional, but when you introduce a punch, the graft which comes out, in that case, it is not equal. It is less on the convex side as compared to the concave
See, if you're
side.
talking of sebaceous gland, to an
Yes.
extent that can be understood.
Yeah, sebaceous gland.
But bulge is not sebaceous gland.
Yeah, yes.
No, I meant the sebaceous gland is more prominent on the concave side because you have introduced the punch in such a way, like this.
Upper side
If the patient is lying like down like this and the hair are coming out like this, there's a sebaceous gland all throughout. But when we introduce the punch like this, there's a tendency for the sebaceous gland to be more prominent on the lower side as compared to the upper side because the punch is going in like this.
room is more down.
Yeah,
because we introduce in the upper part of
because we are introducing the punch like that.
But this is, you are assuming that sebaceous gland is only on one side of the hair follicle.
No, it is not
It's
assuming.
actually three-dimensional, so it
Sir, it is
is.
being cut now. Because if this is my hand, this is the sebaceous gland and hair follicle is coming out of the skin like this. When my punch will go in order to accommodate the curvature of the punch, I will keep this part of the punch slightly lower below. And I will move like this. As a result of which, this thing gets shaved off.
Can I explain to you?
Yeah, I've seen it I shared in the morning also.
No, I'm trying to conceptualize it. I'm not saying you're wrong, but we have to explain what is there in the anatomy.
The glass. This is the hair follicle, and this is going like that. So the room is more here, down. So you get a more sebaceous gland here than here. And that's why he wants to.
Yes, and the point is that you are trying to accommodate for the curvature of the punch, because this hair follicle is coming out like this. If we had a, if that is why we say when you introduce the punch, this hair shaft will be either in the center or in the superior part of this cut surface of the punch. So if you go up like this, you will cut the inferior part. There will be a transaction. In order to avoid the transaction, you make your punch like this, and then there is a discrepancy or a difference in the size of the sebaceous gland which is left.
Okay, the second point. Now, you said if you apply aloe vera gel after 5 days, it will prevent cobblestoning.
Sorry, sir?
For curve.
No, that is for the curvature. Sometimes the grafts, they just start sticking out. So, like if you keep applying the gel or an ointment, they have a tendency to stay flush with the skin. Otherwise, they have a tendency to stick out because of the movement per se of the region. Scalp is not mobile, no. Other areas, because they are firmly adherent. But here it is in constant motion. Even if you've done everything perfect, we still get to see cobblestoning in certain areas.
My last point, How many of you seen transient facial palsy during a beard hair transplant?
Yes, sir. I was coming to that. That is one precaution again, transient
That was our
palsy.
next.
Paresis.
Yeah.
That is because also we see it more because we are using blocks. So we are using nerve blocks, and also sometimes even if you're not using nerve blocks, you're using just simple local anesthesia. So even that can cause a transient paresis. So we advise not to take be careful with the food and hot liquids.
You see it almost every time.
Almost
There's a
all
transient
the time.
paresis, then only you will be able to operate. So we tell the
That's
patient.
motor, no? We want
No,
sensory.
not the motor, the sensory.
Yeah, but the motor,
Motor
part-
I have never seen.
Ropivacaine,
It
I
happens.
think, don't
It
you think the ropivacaine should be used to, because ropivacaine is one which gives only the sensory, not the motor. That's what we use in,
See, I think it's only the fact that it happens. That's the only thing that we should know, as basically as physicians or doctors or plastic surgeons, that you inject that area, a little drift is bound to produce this.
yeah.
So the patient should be, the doctor should be convinced that this will happen. The patient should be aware that this could happen. So it should not be a panic situation for both.
Yeah.
That it is reversible. That's all that you need to know.
This is very important
morning,
to
yes.
explain to the patient. Two of my patients from whom I was harvesting the beard, and one in which this beard to beard we were doing it, the patient became really restless when his lips and the area became numb, and it took us almost the 30 minutes to make him understand, ki don't worry, it is for the part being only, don't worry, nothing will go wrong. So this is very important to explain before giving the anesthesia. Ki after the blocks, he will have the paresis, his lip will be numb. When he go for the tea break or coffee break, he should take care of it. While eating the food, he should not talk on mobile with his attendants. I have seen one patient of mine who had the bite over his lower lip. So these are the things which we forget, but they are very important. After surgery, they forget the surgery, and these things becomes the important part.
So,
now,
one thing specifically I tell my patients is to avoid any hot foods for at least 10 days. I tell them very specifically this thing.
why for 10 days?
Because even if paresis is there, he'll recover over that time.
Paresis never.
No, I'm just trying to say. And moreover, we have put grafts. I don't want any heavy stuff to be taken by the patient, neither too hot things.
Heavy stuff is something different, and hot stuff is something
Even
different.
hot stuff at least for 3-4 days. I tell for 10 days, typically I tell them. That's what protocol I follow.
We don't say anything like this. The next morning when the patient gets up, it is all right. So we reassure the patient that this thing is going to stay for some time and it will get all right in the
Ram,
next
So
morning.
two things. One is, if you use a very fine needle, then the chances of the graft moving out is far less
Less.
as compared to preformed slit and asking somebody else to put. The chances are that your slits may be bigger for convenience.
I
So
agree.
since I use the finest needle and I know that it's going through, very rarely do I find any of the grafts moving out or pitting or whatever. The second thing about this paresis, on a second note I wanted to tell you, these things I usually tell them, and once it happens, I even show them that this has already happened on the table, let alone patient recognizing later or later on finding. So we tell them that this will happen, and if it has happened, I show them that with a mirror, this has already happened. But on one occasion where we were doing a earlobe, I had asked one of my juniors just to get things ready, but over enthusiastically the doctor gave local. They have seen me put it at a particular area, but they didn't know at what plane I was giving. So they poked it in such a way that by the
Facial.
time I came, already the face was, that side was gone. At that point, since the patient was not prepared for it, I cancelled the surgery.
Oh.
I said this is reversible, but I didn't want the patient to feel that something has happened and then surgery has also been done. So I just reassured them. I said we will do it under better circumstances, but I just put off the surgery.
Yes, that's a very, very important point that, and it's a great thing you postponed it rather than having everything on, because patient become very, very conscious about it, ki this will going to recover or not. Whatever you gave them answer, but every time the question will keep on coming. Now,
Prefabrication of FE graft advisable in face transplant.
prefabrication.
Fabrication of FE graft
You want,
in face.
no, you want to ask de-epithelialization or breaking, splitting up of grafts?
Not splitting, de-epithelialization, prefabrication.
It may be helpful. It may be helpful, but I have never done that. It may be.
I've
We
always,
are in routine rate, prefabrication.
I've always done.
Always.
Always prefabrication. So it might help in reducing the popping out and what problems we all have. Even the cobblestone scarring appearance.
Maybe.
So the, Ram sir, you want to say something to audience, the prefabrication? Could you you already told
Not
it.
only for the beard, I always do it for every.
For the every year.
Same here, all.
Yeah.
Prefabrication in the sense
De-epithelialization.
Deepithelialization.
that I understood what he was telling.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
So it is the deepithelialization, you cut off your skin, maybe epidermis, but in that it is very important while doing that, either you yourself do it so that you don't chopped off the sebaceous gland, which is very, very important.
I think most of the people are nowadays not even doing strip, so they are not working under microscopes the way we used to mantis and all that.
Yeah.
So it is very difficult to be precise while shaving it off or de-epithelizing.
No, it's, yes, that's
And,
right.
and the reason when we started off FUE, we never did it because we thought that it will cause extra trauma. So now majority of the people all over the world do not do that. There's nothing right or wrong, but they just don't do that. Because now the generation which is coming up doesn't even know there is a term called de-epithelialization.
You may need to do it only if you have a punch that is bigger than 1 mm, because
1 mm,
lesser
yeah.
than that it may not be relevant.
If you are using 0.9 mm,
It may not be relevant.
but in cases where the 0.9 mm is going and you are harvesting at too acute angle, then you will have a larger skin island. We do in eyebrow cases to all the grafts, we deepithelize them. If they are, and 2 hair follicle we divide, make them single hair follicle and deepithelize them, especially for the eyebrows, but not for the beard and not for the mustaches. But if it is good, if you can do deepithelialization under the microscope, that will be, otherwise you don't do it without using higher magnification. Probably it is better you do go more than 4.5 like we do under microscope mantis, which is the 6x. The reason is you have to salvage by all means the sebaceous gland, which is which plays a very important role. Dr. Dhurat has yesterday explained that what is the importance of the sebaceous gland also. You want to say something?
I have basically transited from FUT to FE. For the last 7 years, I was doing FUT, then shifted to FU. So in routine, as a strip surgeon, a team of 5 technicians with a constant with me for the last 10 years are de-epithelializing the FUT grafts. Now when shifted to FE, in all the cases, maybe in scalp also, we used to de-epithelize, and that too only under 1.5 to 2x visor loop, which are being used as a routine. The de-epithelialization is done by the team, not by me. I harvest the graft, I make the slits, I give local anesthesia. Now for the last 3 years with 2000, 3000, if you whatever, with a routine de-epithelialization, I think my results are excellent. So what is the take home message? It is just a point of taking practice. One group may not de-epithelize, one with epithelize, but yes, if even de-epithelize, it is routinely been done in 1.5 to 2 without any compromise in the results. And just one more thing, what is the exact meaning of prefabrication? It's a question for me.
I'm not-
Prefabrication.
I don't know, to be
No,
honest.
prefabrication is not a terminology.
We were using in the flaps.
Yes.
Vivek,
Prefabrication.
we prefabricated for the conchal cartilage, for
Yeah,
the nose
that is when
reconstruction.
you applied-
Forehead flap, we prefabricate them by using the bone graft. You make a nose over here, or the radial artery forearm flap, you construct a bone, and then you. So you have prefabricated a flap. That term we have been using in the flap surgery, not for this here.
So I've-
No.
No. I think
No,
the
no,
terminology is incorrect. Prefabricated.
Yeah, it's not, it's only applicable when you are adding Another anatomical
Another
tissue
anatomical thing.
to the harvested tissue, that's all.
Yes.
So 2 points. One, to overcome this cobblestoning, it is better to make the slit slightly more deeper so that the graft can snugly fit and is flushing with the skin. Number two thing, one comment I want to make about eyebrows is that majority of the people who undergo eyebrows are the females. And females are commonly used to making their own eyebrows with their own hand. So they are used to, they want a certain type of look, which is why they are used to, looking at the mirror and making the certain kind of eyebrows. So I always feel better if a female patient draws the outline of the eyebrow by herself, rather than myself suggesting to her, because she has a certain image which she would like to emulate. Because I've had this challenge that sometimes the female finds that the width of the eyebrow is more or less. So it is the same thing which Sam Lam does. I feel it is better to let them decide the boundaries rather than the surgeon ask.
So the last, just short, complications. Any major complications you have faced in facial hair is cobblestoning.
Cobblestone.
Wrong direction,
Misdirection.
jet out.
Not misdirection.
Has
but
anybody-
cobblestone.
Sometimes it has happened in the philtrum area that the graft.
They come up, sir.
Because
That's
again, you make the slit like this, but when it heals, it goes around 10 to 15 degrees above. That is the principle of healing. So
facial
whatever-
paralysis, permanent facial paralysis. No,
facial
those-
nerve is too deep, sir.
they are too deep. But as the sir said, if somebody is copying, as Dr. Ram used to do the local anesthesia and his assistant was that he gives here, he doesn't know, here are the planes also. In that cases, they are accidental transaction of facial nerve, because when I was doing the fellowship in brachial plexus and facial nerve reconstruction, we used to get the cases of facial nerve transaction. And many things you think they are very simple, but they are not.
But
You never know.
Is it due to the injection? Because in this case, we are not opening up.
Implantation, making the slit.
I think it is virtually not possible. We had to go a lot deep. So many people would have done parotid surgeries. It is, I think, more than 1 centimeter deep. In this area, in order to find it, you have to retract a lot of parotid tissue, and the slits which we are making are hardly 4 to 5
Mandibular
millimeter.
branch and the mental branch. They are superficially. Not I am telling the trunk.
No. I am saying in this part. You are talking of this part?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
cervical branch?
Marginal mandibular.
I have never seen it. I feel it is too superficial, and if your angle is proper 4 to 5 millimeter, you are just flushing the skin. You are more or less remaining within
When
the
you are
dermis.
following the correct technique, then the structures are miles away. like many times person asks me when I am doing something over the eyelid, but you may injure me. I always say, no, I am a kilometer away from your eye, because I know where I am. So time is gone.
Sir, one last question.
Oh, okay, thank you. One thing very important was eyelid I wanted to ask. Eyelash.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. We are on to the next session number 13. I think everybody is feeling sleepy. So can you just stand up and have a refresh break? You can stand up and then sit down again. Relax, just relax. Have a stretch break. पीछे वाले भी खड़े हो सकते हैं वैसे. Everybody can stand up. No. Can the tea and coffee be served here? I don't know. I'm not. Sandeep sir, tea and coffee inside. अगर सारे fresh हैं तो can we have welcome applause for the next session? Thank you very much. So we move on to the next session after having studied the techniques, and as Dr. Anil Garg was saying that if you are doing the things right way, the structures are miles away. But if you don't do that, you are bound to land up with complications. And in order to cover that, we have an esteemed panel of panelists, and we are going to cover potential complications with hair transplant, management of complications, and how to manage an unhappy patient. So may I call upon Dr. Sumit Agarwal, the first speaker, to speak on donor area complications specific to strip harvest and FUE. Sumit, please. Sumit is a plastic surgeon practicing in Mumbai and Dubai. Sumit, please.
Good afternoon. I will be presenting donor area complications specific to FUT and FUE. Hair restoration surgery as such is a safe cosmetic procedure. There is a minimal downtime of 3 to 5 days, during which time the patient may have some complaints of pain and edema. But complications as such are rare. But of late there have been increase in the complication rate because of the increase in unregulated number of surgeries, and most of these complications are avoidable. Complications in strip harvesting: infection, wound dehiscence and necrosis, white scar, neuralgia, hypertrophic scar, hypopigmentation of the scar, donor hair effluvium, and rare reported AV fistula. Infections are not very common in the scalp because of the excellent blood supply. But yes, there is an increased risk in diabetes and smokers, so you have to be careful, proper history, and full aseptic precautions in the surgery. It can also happen because of the poor hygiene or post-op care by the patient. It manifests as edema, erythema, discharge. Can be avoided by advising patient to use medicated soap before and on the day of the surgery, prophylactic antibiotics, and full aseptic precautions because it's an invasive procedure. Management include diabetes control by insulin, swab culture, blood counts, topical cleansing, and antibiotics. Wound dehiscence and necrosis is again not very common in strip. There may be predisposing factors like anemia, malnutrition, diabetes, tobacco. It can happen because of wide strip harvesting and maybe because of the previous scar which limits the mobility of the scalp. Can be managed again by topical cleansing, debridement, antibiotics. Healing is very good by secondary intention in scalp. Rarely secondary suturing is required. Strip scar widening is cosmetically unacceptable to the patient. It can again happen because of wide strip excision or stretching of the scar in the mastoid area, infection or necrosis of the suture line, or transition of follicles in the edges, or use of excessive electrocautery. And it also depends upon a lot on the individual scarring tendency. It can be avoided by keeping the strip width limited to 1.5 centimeter, double layered suturing, trichophytic closure, implanting grafts in the suture line, oral antibiotics, anti-inflammatory tabs. Scalp laxity exercises can be advisable for 4 weeks prior to the surgery, especially in the second strip excision cases where the new strip should preferably be harvested below the first strip or above rather than excising the strip. There are some scalp laxity assessment tools described in the literature. Mayer's elasticity scale, where they measure the horizontal scalp laxity. Then Feldman's technique is there. Laxometer 1 and 2 described by Dr. Parsa Moibi, Wong's and laser legs. Scar widening can be managed quite nicely by FUE transplant over the scar. There is option of scar revision and scalp micropigmentation also. Neuralgia or hypoesthesia can happen because of damage to the neurovascular structures above the galea by a deep incision or excessive use of electrocautery. Hypoesthesia can happen from full damage, and neuralgia or hypoesthesia can result from partial damage. Most of these symptoms are self-resolving in 6 to 8 weeks' time. Management include counseling of the patient, vitamin B12 tablets, sometimes medications like gabapentin or triamcinolone infiltration if it is sore, and rarely excision of painful neuroma. Hypertrophic scar and keloid can happen because of exaggerated response to healing. There can be some reasons like excessive tension, infection, or necrosis of the suture line. And again, it depends a lot on individual scarring tendency, keloid tendency. It can be avoided by adding triamcinolone in tumescent solution in patients who have bed scarring already, we can start steroid ointments and massage of the donor area with the moisturizer in the early scar. And if it is already a scar, then we can use intralesional triamcinolone for hypertrophic scar, and we can add 5-fluorouracil for keloidal scar, and we can use lasers, vascular laser also. Complications in FUE, hypopigmented white dot scars, donor area depletion, acute effluvium, buried grafts or epithelial cyst, folliculitis, harvesting outside safe donor area, necrosis, numbness or paresthesias, and increased follicular transaction in second session. Hypopigmented or white dot scars happens because of healing by secondary intention and because of depletion of epidermal melanocyte reservoir from the hair bulb. There are more chances if the punch size is 1 millimeter or more. It is more common in Indian colored skin, or if there is concentrated or exaggerated harvesting, and it also again depends on individual scarring tendency. It can be avoided by using optimal punch size of 0.8 to 0.9 mm, spread out harvesting, partial or split system harvesting using A-cell metry system. Management includes counseling the patient not to keep the hairs very short and scalp micropigmentation, and really sometimes grafting. Donor area depletion can give rise to a moth-eaten or pseudo-syphilitic appearance. It can again happen because use of a large punch size or over-harvesting over a localized or diffuse area, and sometimes mega sessions by a novice surgeon. Can be avoided by spread out harvesting in a random pattern, leaving 3 to 4 follicular units in each harvested graft, and limiting a single session to around 2,500 or 3,000 grafts maximum. Abrupt transitions between the harvested and non-harvested area in the safe donor area can be cosmetically unappealing. Feathering of the margins can avoid that situation. Harvesting outside safe donor area can result in loss of transplanted hairs in the future in recipient area, and also exposure of the donor area in the crown or parietal scalp. These are the various safe donor area described: the Unger's safe donor area, Ald's and Cole's safe donor area in the literature. Parietal whorl concept given by Park, which he says that the superior limit of the safe donor area starts around 5 to 6 centimeter below the parietal whorl. But to the current understanding, safe donor area is uniquely different for each patient, and there are no strict dividing zones or borders which are good for all patients. We can see in this young patient the position of the parietal whorl and the safe donor area starting. It's more than 7 centimeter. So donor area planning is very important for FUE harvesting. We need to estimate the Unger's safe donor area, determine follicular unit density, look for miniaturization, estimate the number of grafts that can be harvested over lifetime, evaluate the future requirement as per familial hair loss pattern, prepare a long-term plan for the patient. We need to evaluate the impact of any previous hair transplant surgery on the donor area, and folliscopic assessment is also necessary to rule out any surprises on the morning of procedure like alopecia areata and all. Acute effluvium of donor area can be diffuse or limited. It happens because of hampered blood supply. It is correlated with large sessions of harvesting, excessive epinephrine, difficult harvesting, deep punch, emotional stress, and multiple factors. It can start as early as 3 to 4 weeks after transplant, but most of the time it is self-limiting and resolves in 3 to 4 months. Multivitamins and minoxidil application can help. Buried grafts or epithelial cysts are more common with blunt punches because of the excessive vertical force. It can also happen with sharp punches if the engagement is not proper or there is deep coring of the follicles. It can also more chances when there is over-tumescence. You can avoid it by removing all the grafts from the donor area at the end. Folliculitis. Folliculitis can be a sign of donor area infection. It can also happen because of buried grafts. Sometimes sterile folliculitis is seen in partially transected follicles. Again, papules, pustules, tenderness. You can manage it by antibacterial creams and orals. There was a recently paper published by Dr. Kapil and Dr. Aman regarding like they found increased rate of follicular transition rate in secondary surgery if there was a previous FUE done. Although the statistics were not significant, but it can be attributed to increased inflammation and fibrosis of previous surgery. To conclude, complications are avoidable. FUE was developed to avoid wide linear scar of strip harvest, but we all know now that the damage to the donor area can be more crippling by FUE. There is a sharp learning curve and skill training for FUE, contrast to the popular belief like it's a very simple surgery. Proper donor area management involves using small punch, spreading the harvest over safe donor area, limited to 2,500 grafts, and we can always add body grafts for a mega session. Ignorance is a bliss for the technicians and novice surgeon, but it is a dead end for the patient. So we need to be aware of the future requirement also. Thank you.
At least we can clap, he has given a presentation. Thank you very much.